Hi, this is Russell Morris, and you're listening to Retrospective with John Broughton on Casey Radio, 97.7 FM.
I guess for someone like me, a long-time Russell Morris fan and a blues fan, this album is like the best of both worlds.
I guess so, yes. I wasn't sure because I've always wanted to do a blues record and I've always loved the blues. John Hammond was like one of my all-time favourites and I had every album he ever did, and I really like John Lee Hooker and things like that. But you start off your career and you do things, because when I first started, we did blues and actually Tamla Motown type of stuff. And I thought, one day I'll go back to my roots, and I wanted to do a blues record. And it just sort of came along at the right time and the right subject matter, because I'm older now and I sort of appreciate history, and particularly the history of Australia. And I thought, well, after I saw the photo of Thomas Archer, which is the front cover of the album, I thought, wow, I'm going to write a song about this guy. And it was almost like he gave me a key to open up a room. And inside that room are all those wonderful treasures like Farlap and Les Darcy and Squizzy Taylor and the Sydney Harbour Bridge and Arthur Stace. And I thought, gee, this is really, and there's still a lot more that I want to write about. So it's a really nice thing for me to do. I just really feel very comfortable with it. It's a skin I've slipped into and I'm really enjoying.
I guess music aside, if nothing else, this album deserves to win some sort of recognition for that album cover. It's an amazing photograph. Did you have to go through a bit of rigmarole to get permission to use it?
Yes, I did, and they were absolutely wonderful. It was the New South Wales Historic Houses Trust that had the rights to those photos. And they were so generous to me. They allowed me to use the photo, which was just fabulous. So I always hope people will Google their site and have a look at all the wonderful stuff that they've got on there, because they've got tons and tons of fantastic things. So they were very good to me.
I believe your grandmother was the source of many of the stories that inspired you to write this album, particularly stories of Squizzy Taylor.
Yeah, she would see Squizzy standing on the corner of Church Street and Bridge Road in Richmond when she was a young woman, and she said he was out there with about half a dozen guys all the time, standing there. She said they were all snappily dressed, but he was a little squirt, she would say. And she would talk about the Great Depression, because she was a young woman in that, and she would talk about all the things that happened to her and how hard it was, and on rations, and I'm sure the Depression wasn't as bad here as it was in America and Europe, but it was still very, very bad. People, that's where all the swaggies and that started. They couldn't get any work, so they would constantly travel up and down the country trying to get work from town to town. So it was an interesting era, and you look at the era, and you look at those old photos and you go, gee, that's like another planet. I can't relate to those sort of things. But when you think about it, the world economy has been precarious for a number of years now. We look back and we had Farlap as our favourite sort of sports hero as a horse. Now we've got Black Caviar.
Yeah.
We had Squizzy Taylor and Thomas Archer as gangsters, and then we've just had in Melbourne all those gangster wars that have been, and it's still going on, and killing each other. So have things really changed? I don't think they have. I think they're changed, but we just look different, and we're a modern technology society. But I don't think intrinsically we've changed.
But as they say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Yeah,
that's exactly right, John. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess long-time fans of your music shouldn't really be too surprised that you've put out a blues album. There's been hints of it there, here and there in your back catalogue over the years, hasn't there?
Only tiny hints, yeah. I sort of you paint yourself into a corner when you start your early career. Like, see, I originally wanted to be an actor, and I never got the chance to act because I was too busy doing music. And when we did music and we had the hits, I was too busy sort of trying to keep the record company happy and trying to keep food on the plate by having hits. And I lost sight of some of the things. You lose sight of some of the things that really that you love and that made you when you first started. So it was sort of a homecoming in a way, and it's been surprising to me, because when I first did the album, no one was interested, and I didn't think I would get a record deal, so I produced it myself, and it was initially sent out in a cardboard cover. That's all we had, with that photo on the front, but it was just a cardboard cover.
Wow.
And then someone became interested, and then everything changed.
But I guess the theme of history is not unusual to you, though. Wings of an Eagle is well documented that that was a result of your love of history, and you've been a bit of a history buff, I guess, through the years.
Yes, in particular Australian history, and also in particular Italian history. I love Italian history, so I read voraciously about Italian history and all those sort of things. So I just think there's some lessons and some things to be learnt in the past, and there's some things in the past that people would do things that were quite surprising. You'd think, how did they possibly achieve that? So I find it really astounding to look back and see the great achievements that some people did back then, and some of the things they did, and it's enlightening and also inspiring.
Now, Shark Jaws, Thomas Archer was very much a shady Sydney character, but a very unshady character was also from Sydney, Mr. Eternity. You wrote about him. Tell us a little bit about him.
Well, he was a great character. He was an alcoholic, and he had some pretty nefarious jobs working in brothels and things like that. And he actually went to a speech by a World War One Victoria Cross decorated hero who was a Christian, and he made this, it was a religious sort of lecture, and Arthur was completely converted. So he decided to spend the rest of his life, virtually, going around every day in the morning before everybody got up and writing the word eternity on the pavement. And I don't know whether he thought that he would be taken into paradise for that or whatever, who knows. But that was what he did, and what brought it home to me was the New Year's Eve celebrations when they had eternity written on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. I noticed it on television. I thought, gee, and it stuck in my mind. And then when I was doing the album, we had a song, and I was just starting to write it, and I was running through the verses, and it just popped out right into the chorus. It's Mr. Eternity. It must have been going around inside my subconscious, and the words Mr. Eternity popped out, and I thought, wow, that's good. I want to write about him. So then I started to put the whole thing together.
Now, musically, this album is very much out of the American blues tradition, but the subject matter is undoubtedly Australian. The marriage just works perfectly. Did it surprise you at all that how well the songs of this nature would fit into the blues format?
Well, I wasn't sure, and I wasn't sure how people would accept it. Now, I knew people would go, oh, what are you doing using American music and to write about Australian history? And the thing is in the past, people have written songs about Australia in a country vein. If you look at country music, it came from America anyway.
That's
or
right.
Ireland, and so I've got a bit of a salute there to my Irish background. In Squizzy, it's almost like an Irish blues. The melody is a very Irish thing on Squizzy Taylor. So there's a bit of a salute there to that. So I just thought, if you're looking at music to cradle it in, you couldn't possibly do that history and use a sequenced piano and use all those sequences and modern guitar sounds, because they weren't around then. Yeah. So what I tried to do was use instruments that were around in that time, really old instruments. I weakened a little bit, mainly because the great guitar player that played on the album wanted to use a couple of electrics, and I went crook at him. I said, I only wanted this acoustic because it's supposed to be an era. And he said, don't worry, I've only brought really old guitars and old amps. He said, these are very, very early vintage stuff. And he said, I'll get very vintage sounds. And I was reluctant, and I said, oh, no, I don't like this. And he put a couple down, and I thought, no, that's really good. I like that. So he did it, and he got away with it without me killing him.
So what are your hopes for this CD? Do you hope that it might prick up the ears of some people who may just see you as a 60s, 70s nostalgia act playing the classic hits and all that?
Well, it's changed a lot of things already. Right now I'm doing every blues festival in Australia, and they never would have picked me to do that ever in the past. But the album is now number one on Rhythms Magazine blues charts. It's number one blues played album around the country. It's number 28 on the national charts, like ARIA charts. And it's number one on iTunes blues, singles and albums. So it has changed a lot of things, and a lot of people's concept of me has probably gone a little bit out the window. They've probably thought, gee, that was different, didn't expect that. But I didn't expect it either. I just wanted to do an album about history and my love of sort of basic music, whether it be roots or blues, because I like really rootsy, very simple type of music. And it was surprising to me that people actually took it on and said, wow, this is commercial. And my question is, well, if it's commercial, how come every record company in Australia passed over it? So it's just it's been an enigma. It's been a very big puzzle, and I'm very delighted about it, John. It's great.
Yeah, it must be. And the reviews have been fantastic too. I've read nothing but widespread acclaim. And did it give you a sense? Does it give you a sense of relief because you were putting out something that was so different for you?
Well, I think it's a relief. Sorry, I've just jumped out into the traffic. I'll jump
That's all right.
away where it's quiet. It's a sense of relief, not so much to me, because I'd already penciled in as selling it at gigs, and I was going to make my money back that way. I guess it's a relief to the Robert Rigby, who took the album on and has put his heart and soul into it, promoting it. It's a relief to him because he is delighted that it's happened for him and for me. But initially I never had any great expectations for it because I'd had an album, well, in the last 31 years, every album I've released has sunk without a trace. So I didn't have any great expectations. I just thought it would be okay. People might be interested in it and maybe allow me to do a few of the folk festivals and things like that because I wanted to work acoustically and do all that sort of stuff. And it just completely surprised everybody, I think.
Yeah. Talk about the opener, Black Dog Blues, which you wrote with Jim Keys. Jim, well known for his love of blues himself. I guess he must have been extremely supportive with you in this project.
Oh, he was. Jim was the guy that got me started recording again. Him and another guy called Gary Page, who I wrote some of the songs with, because Jim said, you've got to do an album. I said, why should I? He said, because you've got to. I said, but no one will buy it. He said, who cares? He said, it's all body of work. It doesn't matter. He said, if you're a cabinet maker, you'd be making cabinets.
That's true.
And I said, you're right, Jim. And he said, you've got to do it. And I said, well, I'm thinking of doing a blues album. And he said, that'd be great. So we were away, I think we were in Newcastle. And I went into his room and I said, Jimmy, I've written a blues song, but I need you to write some words for the bridge section. Are you interested? And he said, yeah. So I played it to him. That was Black Dog Blues. And I'd written the bit, Little Honey's in the kitchen when it's cooking up a storm. I wrote those two first verses. And the next bit I had, bound, down, mung down, walk around, jump around, that bit. And I said, can you write some words for that? And he came up with those words, and I think they're great. He said it's my salute to Bob Dylan. Because Bob Dylan's got a song like that with a lot of those things, yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned Gary Page. I believe the two of you go a long way back.
Yeah, we've known each other since 1968, and I was talking to him about doing a new album. I wanted to do a blues album. He said, well, listen to this, and he played me Dion's album. And Dion's from the 50s. And I said, wow, that's really good. And he said, you should do something like that. And I took it in, and I sort of I went round in my head, and I thought, yeah, that's very simple, and that's what I want to do, something very simple. And I started to write some blues songs. I had about 4, and I just wasn't quite sure of the direction. I just write it. And then I saw the photo of Thomas Archer, wrote the song, and as I said, it's almost like he stood up and said, hey, here's a key to this door, go and look in there and see what's in there.
So are you enjoying the collaborative songwriting process more now than writing alone?
Yes, I do. I do like writing alone because I have complete control. I've started on the new album, And everyone now has got their hand up because everyone who didn't get a song on the last album is saying, please, can I write a song with you? And so I've already finished 3 songs for the next album. I'll probably write 2 or 3 with Gary because I owe it to Gary to do. And I'll write 2 with the guitar player that I'm working with now. So that's 5, 6, 7, 8. 2 with the bass player, 9, 10. And then 2 with the other guitar player that played on the album, Shannon Bourne. It's 11, 12. And probably another 5 maybe by myself, so I can record them all and then only keep the best 13.
And are you proposing to go down the blues path again with that one?
Yes, yeah. I'm really enjoying it, and I'm enjoying working simply without a keyboard player. I prefer to work in a real simple situation with 2 guitars, drums and bass, and I prefer it when we do it acoustically too. That's a lot of fun.
There are some terrific names amongst the musicians on this record. Tell us a bit about them, and then did you go into this project with specific names in mind for specific roles?
No, well, I just went into the project to do the album, and once we started to get it, and Shannon Bourne, who's a wonderful guitar player that played on it, Shannon said, why don't you get a couple of guests? And he said, you need high-profile guests, because I couldn't get a deal. No one was interested in the album. He said, if you get high-profile guests, maybe someone will take the album up. And I said, well, I'll just approach my friends, you know. So Troy Casadale, who was wonderful, he's a great mate, and he just said, whatever, you know. And they all just gave their time. Renee Gayer, James Black, and Mark Lizotte just said, yeah, sure, I'll play it. I said, but I don't want you to play guitar. I want you to play banjo. And he was rapt. He said, that's exactly... He said, I love playing banjo. So he played the banjo, and he played cello as well, which was interesting.
So when writing the songs, was there a need for you at any time to actually sit down and do any factual research about some of the characters you were writing about? Or are you pretty much happy to let artistic license run its course?
Oh, no, I wanted to get dates right. So I made sure I knew the dates when I used dates, because I didn't want them to be out by 10 years or anything. So I just checked on dates. I knew most of the facts about these people, and I just needed to know a couple of dates and a couple of names that I wasn't quite sure of, bit players, like Snowy Cutmore. I had to mention him because he was the one that killed Squizzy Taylor, but Squizzy Taylor killed him at the same time. It was a gun battle. And I also needed to mention a couple of names in the About to Break, which is about the 1927 war on the Victorian docks. But however, I've got one character completely out of context, but it didn't matter. I used the name Shannon, which was Pat Shannon, but he was around well after that. But I thought, I'll just use it as poetic license.
A couple of songs there for a couple of sporting icons, Les Darcy and Farlap. Many songs in the past written about iconic figures like that have been a bit cheesy, celebratory type tunes. Yours are nothing like that. And I guess the blues style might be a contributor to that. Tell us how those 2 figures inspired you to write about them above and beyond any other sporting icons in our history.
Well, that's really interesting that you mentioned the cheesy thing, because that's what I was incredibly worried about.
Yeah.
Because I've heard songs about sporting icons and they're just cheesy, and I thought, I've got to make sure, because there's a fine line between writing facts, all facts, which is like a journalistic exercise, or writing poetry mixed up with facts. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to make it poetic, and I didn't want to make it hardcore whereby all the facts reel off like you're reading a fact sheet. I wanted it to be a bit poetic, and that was a bit of a worry with me with both those songs. So I had to be very careful to try and walk the fine line of trying to be true to the story, but also trying to make the words sound right. There's a real particular thing. You need the right vowel sounds to make words sound right. You know, some words like galvanised iron doesn't really work sometimes. So things like that, you've got to be real careful about the choice of words. And I think in the past, people who have written about sporting icons have been cheesy because they've just written the words all out and then they've tried to write a melody to it, and it's been crappy. Yeah. So you've got to walk the fine line between poetry and facts.
So how are you at the moment incorporating this material into your live act? Is it a complete mixing in with the old material, or are you doing like a half and half type show?
I do a half and half type show because I just don't think they mix well. So what I do is I take people on the history list and I take them back to the 1920s, and then I go through and I get through to the end of right to the end of the era there, and I say, well, listen, well, now we're going to come forward in time. We're going to come to 1969. So I then talk about 1969, and I tell them that the songs were vastly different, and my approach to them when I was a young guy was different, and we go through it that way.
You mentioned earlier you're doing a few blues and folk type festivals. Were you a little apprehensive as to how this material would be received because the blues purists sometimes have a reputation for being harsh judges?
Well, I was warned about that because I know the country people are really closed shop. They just don't want to have anything to do with anyone that wants to try and cross over, really.
Yeah.
And they said, oh, you're going to get the blues police. They're going to really go for you. And I said, listen, I'm not trying to please everybody. I'm just trying to do an album that I like. If they don't like it, I don't care. And to be honest, all the blues people, every single magazine, station, have just been so welcoming, so open-armed, and I couldn't say anything better about them. I think the blues people are much more accommodating than anyone else, whether it be pop, whether it be country, or whether the blues people are more prone to welcome you, which was a surprise, and a real pleasant surprise.
That's great to hear. And just before I let you go, Russell, what's the rest of the year got in store for you? What's the plan?
Well, we've got quite a few blues festivals now. I do, I've Port Fairy, then it comes the West Coast Blues Festival, then comes Byron Bay Blues Festival, then comes the Broadbeach Blues Festival, then later on the Gympie Muster, and then later on again the Bridgeport Blues Festival, and there's a whole lot of other small clubs and things that I'll be doing in the meantime, like travelling around the country and promoting. So it's given myself and the band a new lease of life, and we're really enjoying it.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. Look, congratulations on this record. I think when it's all said and done, this could end up being your most timeless album.
Thank you very much, John. A few people have said that, and it's been a surprise. It's great. Even Molly is doing a half-hour special on MTV, which is unbelievable. And I won't have any dancers.
Fantastic. Oh, I must look out for that. That's great.
Yeah, because he normally does all those acts where they've got about half a dozen dancers and all that sort of stuff, and this is great.
Tremendous. All the best, Russell. It's great to catch up with you again.
John.
Okay.
And thank you very much for your support. I do appreciate it, because without people like you, no one would hear about the record.
Not a problem. It's a pleasure.
Thanks, mate.
Okay, cheers.